No way!
In 1889, when Karl Tanzler was just 12 years old and living with his family in Dresden, Germany, he had a very strange dream. In this dream...
Dude, this guy looks like he's... What? He has the genius look. You know what I mean? Like, if I saw a dude like this out in public, I'd be like, this guy knows shit. Like, this guy knows what's up. He knows the secrets of our world. I bet he's an intellectual. Yeah, definitely. He has maidens. He's a fucking
found himself
nerd.
In this black void where everywhere he looked, it was just nothingness.
No drip.
And then behind him, he heard footsteps. And so he whips himself around and he looks, and there's this woman dressed in this big, puffy, elegant white dress walking towards him out of the darkness. And when she walks right up in front of him, she comes to a stop. And she introduces herself as Anna Constantia von Brockdorf, who was a real person in the early 1700s.
What was that name? Anna Constantia von Brockdorf. What the fuck?
She was a noblewoman in Germany, and she would tell Karl that she is actually a distant relative of his.
That's true. My name is basic.
To pass on a very important message. Karl was rooted to the spot. He didn't know
He's
if
the
he should
avatar.
be afraid of what she was going to say, or excited, or nervous. But before he could decide, Anna had already turned and was pointing in the direction she had appeared out of. And so Karl turns and looks in the direction she was pointing, and out of this blackness, out of this void, came this woman's face. It was a face detached from a body. It almost looked like a floating picture of a woman's face. And as this face floated closer and closer,
it's the Elden Ring.
Karl was immediately struck by just how beautiful this woman was. Her hair was jet black like a raven's feathers, and her skin was white like porcelain. But there was something off about this woman, this floating face. She looked sad and kind of frail. And so as Karl found himself staring at this face, which was now right next to them, Anna spoke to him again, and she would tell Karl that this woman, the floating face, she's going to appear in your life later on, and it is your mission given by God to save her. She's going to be very ill, very sick, and you need to find a way to keep her alive. Then Karl, in real life, woke up, and immediately he was struck by just how visceral that dream.
What is this, like, main character protagonist type shit? What the hell? Yo, you and Mr. Ballin have the same chest hair? I got more. I got a little bit more. I got a little bit more than him. We had the same type of chest hair, I'll admit.
But after a few moments, it seemed like, okay, that was just a dream.
This is an anime. It is.
Visceral dreams he had had in the past, this one did not gradually fade from his memory. Instead, over the course of that day, the memory specifically of the raven-haired woman's face really seemed to become more clear and more concrete in his mind, to the point where at the end of that day, he could easily remember exactly what she looked like. Over the following days and months and years, Karl periodically would have this same dream, this same vision of his distant relative Anna, who would come out of the void, and she would remind him to be on the lookout for this raven-haired woman when God sent her to him. But despite these constant reminders in his dreams, and Karl
the Elden Ring
ever
spin-off
vigilant to look for this raven-haired woman in real life, he never actually found her. He never met this woman he was supposed to save. Fast forward to 1926. Karl was 39 years old. By this point, he had gotten married, not to the raven-haired woman, but instead to a local woman in Dresden. And the pair had had 2 daughters together, and they lived a simple life. And, by and large, Karl seemed rather content and happy with his life. However, secretly, he was a little disappointed that these dreams, these visions that he was having of Anna and the raven-haired woman, that they had not come true, that it really had just been a dream. That year, due to an economic downturn...
Dude, if you spoiled it, I can't tell if you're just guessing or if you just spoiled it. If you spoiled it, I'm going to come back and ban you, Ruined Raccoon, okay?
In Germany, Karl and his family left
I'll be
Germany
so mad.
and emigrated to the United States, where they believed there would be better opportunities for them. And when they arrived in the United States, they settled in Central Florida.
It's a guess?
But
It
within
better be a
year,
guess.
Karl and his wife had a severe falling out, and they split up. And so Karl would leave the family home in Central Florida, and he would resettle several hundred miles south in southern Florida in a town called Key West. And it would be in Key West that Karl would get a job as an X-ray technician at a local hospital, and it would also also be in Key West, that Carl's life would change forever. Less than a year after
Raven-haired
settling
girl.
in Key West, Carl was at the hospital going about his day when an older woman walked into the office, and she said to Carl that she was there to get her daughter, her 21-year-old daughter, an x-ray of her chest because her daughter apparently couldn't stop coughing and they were concerned about it. And so Carl began doing the paperwork with the mother when suddenly the daughter came into the office. And as soon as Carl saw her, he knew immediately that she was the raven-haired woman from his dreams. She walked in and she sat down in a chair, and Carl just stopped what he was doing and stared at the daughter. And then he kind of broke out of it and turned his attention back to the mother, and he said to her, "Ma'am, don't worry. I will do everything in my power to save your daughter's life." Now, the mother didn't know what was wrong with her daughter, and so this was both really helpful that this man she was talking to was so willing to help, and also kind of ominous that he was already insinuating that she could be dying. But either way, the mother said, "Thank you very much. We really appreciate that." And so Carl and the mother, they finished their paperwork, and then Carl quickly left from behind his desk and hustled over to the daughter, and he introduced himself, and he reiterated
he's not going to be able to save her.
Good hands. And the daughter was a little bit weirded out by this, but she was polite and said thank you, and she said her name was Elena. And so Carl would take Elena and bring her back and give her the x-ray, and unfortunately he would discover through this x-ray that she had tuberculosis. Today, that disease is easily curable, but at the time, that was a death sentence. When Carl saw this, though, in a weird way, it almost made him happy, because this was another indication that, this really was the raven-haired woman from his dreams. Not only
raven-haired with glossy, deep
but
black
she also
hair
had arrived in desperate
Oh,
need
is that like
of
what it
help.
means?
And so now Carl needed
I thought
to
it meant
find a
red
way
for some
to
reason.
save her, even though he was just an x-ray technician. He was not a doctor, and so he had no clue how to begin to treat tuberculosis. But that didn't stop Carl. Over the next year, Carl would be in touch with Elena and her family on a near daily basis.
Yo, what the fuck is this lab setup, bro? What are you doing in there? What's happening? That's literally just a torture chamber.
Updating them on all of the new techniques to fight tuberculosis that he was doing all this research on, and he would tell them about experimental procedures and drugs they could try, even sometimes paying out of pocket for them to go try them. He would also bring Elena into the office as often as he possibly could to x-ray her again and again and again to see if perhaps she was making good progress. But unfortunately, over the course of that year where he was doing everything he could, it just didn't work. The disease ravaged Elena's body, and on October 31st, 1931,
he couldn't save her.
A year after Carl had first met Elena, Elena would unfortunately pass away. Elena's family was devastated by this, but their grief didn't even compare to Carl's grief. It was like Carl had lost his life too. He couldn't believe he had failed his mission and let the raven-haired woman die. When it came time to bury Elena, Carl said, "Let me pay for the most elaborate gravesite we can possibly make. Let me set up a mausoleum for her." A mausoleum is an external building that sits in a cemetery that effectively serves as a kind of shrine to the deceased. And so her family, they understood that Carl had become very, very close with Elena, although they didn't understand the relationship, but they did understand she meant a lot to him, and so they agreed to let him do this. After Elena was buried inside of this small temple that Carl had built for her, Carl began spending virtually all of his time kneeling inside of it, crying and begging for Elena's forgiveness. Elena's family was well aware that Carl was doing this, and at first they kind of just let it happen, but after several months they began to tell Carl, you really need to let her go. You need to begin to move on. But Carl refused.
Leave me alone with the dead body and build it.
He became more and more obsessed with Elena. Finally, after 7 years of Carl doing this, Elena's family decided, enough is enough. He really needs to stop making her loss all about him. It's not his loss, it's our loss. We're her family. And so the family decided
that is ridiculous. 7 fucking years.
Carl to stop
Dear Lord.
doing what he was doing is to demand he give the key back that gave him access into the small area inside of the mausoleum. So one night, Elena's sister, whose name was Florinda, decided to go over to Carl's house unannounced and confront him and get the key back from him. And so she hopped in her car and she drove over to his property. His house was kind of set back off the road behind some trees, and so you had to drive down this kind of winding driveway to get to it.
Is he going to go crazy?
Turned onto his
Is he going to go
driveway,
sicko mode?
Driving, and when his house came into view, the first thing she noticed was a number of the windows on the first floor were all lit up. Clearly, Carl was home, home. And as she's driving towards the house, she's just looking in these windows. And for a second, she sees Carl, and he's very elegantly dressed in a suit or a tuxedo, and he's ballroom dancing with this woman who's also very elegantly dressed as well. And for a second, Florinda considered turning around and not disturbing him, but then she thought, you know what, this has been going on for so long, I just need to get this over with. And so she...
Oh, no. Oh, no.
She drove her car and stopped in front of Carl's house. She hopped out, she walked up onto his porch, and she knocked on his front door. Inside, she could hear music was clearly playing, but just a few seconds after she had knocked, the music was cut off, and then no one came to the door. And so Florinda knows there's people inside this house, and so she knocks again, but again, there's no movement in the house. It's just silent, as if the people inside are pretending not to be there. And so finally, frustrated, Florinda knocks on the door a third time and says, Carl, I know you're in there. I have to talk to you about my sister. Please come out here. And so finally, she heard the shuffling of feet, and then she heard the sound of the door unlocking, and it opened up just a crack. And through this crack, Carl looked through, and he looked out at Florinda very suspiciously, and he said to her, what do you want? And Florinda would say, look, I'm here to talk to you about my sister. Can I please come inside for a second, or can you come out here and talk to me? But Carl pretty much immediately said no, and then he shut the door. However, before he shut the door, Carl had very briefly stepped out of the way, allowing Florinda to see through that gap into the house. So before the door actually shut, she got to see who and what was inside that house.
Okay, for what idiot, if he's trying to like hide that he has a dead body in the house, why would he just put it right in front of the door where she could see it?
And what she saw was the woman Carl had been dancing with, and the woman was seated in a chair maybe halfway through the house, and she was facing the door, and Florinda knew immediately it was her sister. And so she's standing on the porch having no idea what to make of what she's just discovered. And so feeling kind of overwhelmed, she just kind of staggered off the front porch. She turned around, she ran into her car, and she drove off to tell the police. When the police came back, they knocked on the front door, and they demanded that Carl let them see the woman he was there with. And so at this point, Carl knew the gig was up, and so he opened the door and he allowed them to come inside. And when the police went inside, they saw the woman he was with, and sure enough, it was Elena. However, Elena was deceased and had been for 7 years. After her death, Carl said he was able to talk to her inside of her mausoleum, and so that was why he was...
Oh no, don't tell me, Carl. Carl, don't tell me. Don't tell me you were doing some freaky ass shit in that. Oh man.
Going back there every single night because he and Elena were spending time together. And then at some point in 1933, so 2 years after Elena has been dead and buried, Carl would say she told him while he was visiting her mausoleum that she didn't like being in the mausoleum and that she wanted to come back with him and stay at his house.
Man.
So the following day, Carl had shown up with a child's wagon, and he pulled her out of her coffin, pulled her out of the mausoleum, put her corpse in this wagon, and wheeled her back to his house. He had continued to go to the mausoleum every night for the next 5 years just to keep up appearances, but Elena's body never went back inside of it.
Oh my god, oh no. Oh no. How did his family not know?
She would stay at his house, where he painstakingly attempted to restore Elena's very badly decomposed body to its original form. He strung piano wire through her entire body, connecting all of her bones together. With glass eyes, and he began rubbing.
You're just gonna go? Hello? You're just gonna show it? I did not expect him to just show it.
He also stuffed her insides full of rags in order to give her a full natural look, and he constantly sprayed her with perfume to reduce the
That's
smell.
the replica he made, I'm pretty sure. It literally says, real photo of Elena's mummified body.
Also stuffed her insides full of rags in order to give her a full natural look, and he constantly
I mean, that is true. It wasn't fully a corpse, but it still is a dead body.
sprayed her with perfume to reduce the smell. Once she was, in his eyes, back to normal, he began spending as much time with her as he possibly could. He would change her outfits constantly, he would put on makeup, and he would give her new jewelry, and he would talk to her about the ups and downs of life. He would laugh with her, he would cry with her, he would sleep with her. Carl would admit that ultimately his goal with keeping Elena in his home was to eventually still save her life. He believed if he could somehow get her body up into the stratosphere, that the radiation up there would bring her back to life. And
you guys remember when I said this dude looked like a smart guy? Remember when I said that in the beginning? I think I take that back.
And if he could do that, he would be fulfilling his God-given mission to protect her. But Carl never got a chance to launch her into the stratosphere. Instead, he was charged with wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization. However, these charges would be dropped and Carl would be set free. As for Elena, her body was returned to her family and they would bury her in Key West. So that's going to do it, guys.
What the charges were? Why? Why did they drop the charge? He literally desecrated your sister's body for 5 years straight.
Now it's time to walk away. I hope you enjoyed your stay. Did you laugh or cry or maybe subscribe? I'll thank you either way. You know I will miss you. I hope you return. Tell your friend or your mother to get me more views, please.